the Garden of Gethsemane. The night was cloaked in a quiet, almost eerie stillness as Jesus and his disciples arrived at Gethsemane, the garden nestled among ancient olive trees. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the twisting trunks and leaves, while the air carried an almost tangible weight, a foreboding that seeped into the hearts of those present. Jesus paused and turned to his disciples. His voice was steady, though the anguish beneath it was unmistakable. "Sit here while I go over there and pray," he said, motioning toward a secluded corner of the garden. Then, taking Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John, he moved further into the grove, where the shadows grew deeper and the silence felt more profound. But as they walked, his grief seemed to intensify, and it showed in the way his steps slowed and his shoulders sank. Finally, Jesus turned to the three who accompanied him, and the sorrow etched into his face struck them like a physical force. "My soul is deeply grieved, to the point of death," he confessed, his voice trembling with the rawness of emotion. "Remain here and keep watch with me." The disciples nodded, though they too felt the heaviness of the moment press upon them, leaving them silent and subdued. Jesus stepped away from them, moving deeper into the garden. When he stopped, he fell to his knees, then to his face, the damp earth embracing him as he prayed with all the fervor of a heart breaking under the weight of destiny. "My Father," he cried, his voice thick with desperation, "if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." The words resonated through the garden, though only the trees bore witness to his anguish. It was a moment both deeply human and profoundly divine, as Jesus wrestled with the enormity of his purpose. When he returned to the disciples, he found them sleeping, their heads resting against the trunks of olive trees. The sight stirred sorrow and disappointment within him. "So you men could not keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked, addressing Peter directly. His tone was not harsh, but it carried a weight that pierced through their sleep-dulled minds. "Keep watching and praying that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Leaving them once more, he returned to his solitude, his heart heavy yet steadfast. Again, he fell to the earth, his face to the ground as he prayed. "My Father, if this cannot pass away unless I drink it, your will be done," he said, the words carrying a resignation that was both painful and beautiful. He rose and returned to the disciples, only to find them sleeping once more, their bodies overcome by exhaustion. Jesus' heart ached as he looked at them, but he said nothing. Instead, he left them and prayed for a third time, repeating his plea to the Father. The garden felt heavy with the echo of his prayers, the silence around him amplifying the anguish of his soul. When he returned again, the disciples were still resting, their breath slow and steady. This time, Jesus spoke with a calm resoluteness that signaled the end of their quiet night. "Are you still sleeping and resting?" he asked, his voice carrying both sorrow and urgency. "Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners." He straightened, his posture filled with purpose. "Get up, let us be going. Behold, the one who betrays me is at hand." His voice seemed to ignite the air with sudden intensity, and the disciples scrambled to their feet, the reality of the moment crashing over them like a tidal wave. The quiet of the garden gave way to the sound of footsteps approaching, an ominous march that would change the course of history forever. Jesus' betrayal and arrest. The moment was tense, the quiet night shattered by the sound of hurried footsteps and muffled voices. While Jesus was still speaking to his disciples in the garden, a commotion arose, and the faint light of torches flickered through the olive trees. Emerging from the shadows was Judas Iscariot, one of the 12. His presence was no longer as a friend, but as a betrayer. Behind him trailed a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, their faces grim and determined. They moved with purpose, sent by the chief priests and elders of the people to accomplish their dark mission. Judas, the betrayer, stepped forward, the weight of his treachery hidden behind a veneer of composure. He had given them a signal, a cold and calculated act. "Whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him." His words, though simple, were heavy with the betrayal that would change history. Approaching Jesus, Judas's face betrayed no shame, only hollow pretense. "Hail, Rabbi!" he exclaimed, his tone filled with false reverence as he leaned in and kissed Jesus on the cheek, a gesture that in any other context would symbolize love and respect. Yet here, it marked betrayal. Jesus met Judas's gaze, his expression one of quiet sorrow and unshaken resolve. His voice, calm yet piercing, carried a weight that cut through the tension. "Friend," he said, "do what you have come for." His words were not of anger, but of acceptance, a fulfillment of the inevitable. In that moment, Jesus' grace shone even in the face of treachery. Immediately, the armed crowd stepped forward and seized Jesus, their hands rough and unforgiving. The disciples, overcome with fear and confusion, stood frozen, their hearts racing. But then, one of them, Peter, as fervent as ever, reached for his sword. In a swift, impulsive motion, he struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Blood splattered onto the ground, the scene bursting into chaos. Jesus, however, did not recoil or retreat. He raised his voice, commanding attention. "Put your sword back into its place," he said firmly, his eyes locking onto Peter. "For all those who take up the sword shall perish by the sword." His words held both rebuke and wisdom, a reminder of the futility of violence. He turned to the crowd, his voice resolute yet filled with a divine authority. "Or do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" His gaze swept over them, his words revealing his choice to submit, not out of weakness, but to fulfill a higher purpose. "How then will the scriptures be fulfilled, which say that it must happen this way?" The crowd hesitated, their resolve shaken for a fleeting moment. But the mission pressed on, and they tightened their grip on Jesus. Turning to them, he addressed the injustice of their actions. "Have you come out with swords and clubs to arrest me as you would against a robber?" His voice was calm, but carried a poignant truth. "Every day I used to sit in the temple teaching, and you did not seize me." His words hung in the air, exposing their hypocrisy. "But all this has taken place to fulfill the scriptures of the prophets." The disciples, overwhelmed by fear and the realization of what was unfolding, began to scatter. One by one, they fled into the darkness, their footsteps retreating into the distance. Jesus stood alone now, his captors surrounding him, the olive grove bearing witness to a betrayal that would echo through eternity. Jesus before Caiaphas. The night pressed onward, as those who had seized Jesus led him through the winding streets of Jerusalem, the chill of the late hours lingering in the air. Shadows flickered against the walls of the city as they arrived at the home of Caiaphas, the high priest. Inside, the scribes and elders of the council had already gathered, their faces stern and their minds intent on finding a way to condemn Jesus. Peter followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows to avoid detection. His heart raced as he trailed them, his mind swirling with fear and uncertainty. Reaching the courtyard of the high priest, Peter hesitated before slipping inside and finding a place among the officers. There he sat down, blending into the crowd and trying to mask his growing unease. He watched the proceedings from afar, desperate to see what would unfold. Within the chamber, the chief priests and the council were relentless in their efforts to fabricate a case against Jesus. Their voices rose and fell, frustration clear as witness after witness came forward, only for their testimonies to fall apart under scrutiny. Despite their determination, No false accusation seemed sufficient to achieve their goal. Finally, two men stepped forward, their voices cutting through the murmurs of the council. This man stated, "I am able to destroy the temple of God and to rebuild it in 3 days." One of them said, his words dripping with malice. At this, Caiaphas, the high priest, stood abruptly, his robe shifting with the force of his movement. He turned to Jesus, his voice sharp and commanding. "Do you not answer? What is it that these men are testifying against you?" he demanded. But Jesus remained silent, his composure unyielding in the face of their accusations. His silence seemed to agitate Caiaphas further, who stepped closer, his tone growing even more forceful. "I adjure you by the living God," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber, "that you tell us whether you are the Christ, the Son of God." At last, Jesus spoke, his voice calm but resonant with truth and authority. "You have said it yourself," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Nevertheless, I tell you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." The chamber erupted in chaos. Caiaphas, overcome with fury, tore his robes, the fabric ripping audibly as a show of outrage. "He has blasphemed," he shouted, his voice trembling with anger. "What further need do we have of witnesses? Behold, you have now heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" His question was directed at the council, who responded swiftly and unanimously. "He deserves death," came their resounding answer, their voices filled with venomous resolve. The hostility in the room grew, spilling over into physical aggression. Some spat in Jesus' face, their actions laced with contempt. Others struck him with their fists, their anger manifesting in brutal blows. Still others slapped him, mocking him with cruel words. "Prophesy to us, you Christ," they jeered, their voices dripping with disdain. "Who is the one who hit you?" Through it all, Jesus remained steadfast, his strength and dignity shining in the face of their cruelty. The night grew darker, the shadows of injustice deepening around him as the prophecy unfolded. Peter's denials. Peter sat huddled in the courtyard, the faint glow of the fire reflecting on his troubled face. He pulled his cloak tighter around him, trying to keep warm against the chill of the night. Though the cold seemed to bite deeper than just his skin, it gnawed at his heart. The distant sounds of murmured voices and footsteps filled the air, but Peter's mind was elsewhere, torn between fear and loyalty. His eyes darted toward the chamber where Jesus was being held, the tension of the situation winding tighter around him like a snare. Suddenly, a servant girl approached, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized him. "You two were with Jesus the Galilean," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet of the courtyard. The word sent a jolt through Peter's chest. Panic surged as he tried to compose himself. "I do not know what you are talking about," he said quickly, his voice shaking despite his attempt at nonchalance. He looked away, his heart pounding in his chest. He rose and moved away from the fire, retreating to the gateway in the hopes of avoiding further attention. Yet no sooner had he reached the gate than another servant girl spotted him. Her gaze lingered, and recognition dawned. She turned to the others nearby and declared, "This man was with Jesus of Nazareth." The accusation made Peter's stomach churn. He shook his head vehemently, raising his hand as if to push the words away. "I do not know the man," he insisted, this time with an oath to strengthen his denial. His voice was louder now, the desperation evident. But the night refused to let him escape so easily. A little while later, others in the courtyard began to approach him, their suspicion now undeniable. "Surely you two are one of them," they said, their voices firm with certainty. "For even the way you talk gives you away." Their observation about his Galilean accent only heightened Peter's anxiety, his breath quickening as the walls seemed to close in around him. Peter's fear boiled over into anger. He began to curse and swear, his words laced with desperation and frustration. "I do not know the man!" he shouted, his voice harsh and almost unrecognizable, the panic consuming him. The courtyard fell silent for a moment, and then it happened. A rooster crowed. The sound pierced through the stillness, striking Peter like a lightning bolt. His mind raced back to the words Jesus had spoken to him just hours earlier. "Before a rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." The realization hit him with devastating force, and the weight of his actions crashed down upon him like a collapsing wall. Tears filled his eyes, blurring his vision as he stumbled away from the courtyard. He didn't care where he was going, only that he had to be alone. Finally, he found a secluded spot, and there he fell to his knees. Overwhelmed by grief and shame, Peter wept bitterly, his sobs racking his body. The sound of the rooster's crow echoed in his mind, a haunting reminder of his failure, of the moment he had denied the one he loved most. The night stretched on, heavy with sorrow, as Peter's anguished cries faded into the stillness.